Hello there, I'm K-Ball, and welcome to Human Skills, where I interview tech industry leaders about all the non technical skills that go into success in the tech industry. How does someone decide to go and study how to be a better manager? For Kyle Jaster, COO of Harvie, it happened because he had gotten into management for what he now describes as ego purposes, and then discovered that he was a very bad manager. That realization led him to a path of deliberate study and practice, reading everything from books on management to biographies, and working with a variety of mentors. This was one of many steps in Kyle's career, which took him from being an independent web developer to running product at a digital education startup to being CTO of a logistics firm and now to his role as COO of Harvie Farms. In this wide ranging conversation, we talk about how he thinks about translating between technical and business needs, skills and frameworks he teaches to new managers, how to build trust on a team or in an organization, and much more. I think I can say with confidence he is no longer a bad manager. Please enjoy this interview with Kyle Jaster. Hey, Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to talk. Let's maybe start with your background, and you can share a little bit about sort of your career journey and how you came to care about the human side of tech.
Sure. I'm Kyle Jaster. I'm currently the COO at a company called Harvie, where we deliver locally made products, mostly food products, to people in Western Pennsylvania, particularly Allegheny County. Um, and I come at this kind of through a very circuitous path in some ways, and in other ways, a very clear one. I started in high school. I built my first web design company in 1996 with two friends, and I was kind of like hacking around on HTML and kind of, which this was like everything was tables. There was no CSS, wasn't a thing. You just put the colors on the backgrounds on the table in the HTML. And realized that the thing that I was really good at that time was translating between the people who didn't know what we were doing and my friend Mike, who absolutely knew way more than me about the technology side, but like was not at that time really comfortable, speaking to somebody at the Smithsonian Institute or at a grant funding organization. And we ended up building a lot of websites, for these larger companies because there's just nobody to do it. Um, and my job ended up being kind of like this translator between the tech world and the business world, and so I kind of like learned that very early and have gone from there, to find the balance between the two things, to between kind of my passion for doing things that I feel are good in the world, and leveraging my ability to work with technology, ever since then. So quick thing, I built a design firm in high school, ran that through college, and then ended up joining as the production director for a design firm for a number of years in Manhattan. Then got really interested in becoming a manager, and our firm was very small, and I wanted to kind of take on a bigger challenge. This is in my 20s, and so joined a company called Noodle, which was a search engine for education. So you could find college and pick the one that was the best for you based on a bunch of parameters, or find a tutor in your area, that kind of stuff. And there I really started learning about how to work with people, how to teach people to work with other people, how to think about structure and organization, and aligning incentives and that kind of stuff, as we dealt with a pretty technical product. Actually, we did a lot of data research and a lot of building a search engine, is a not non-technical challenge.
Totally.
And after a couple of years of doing that, I had a really phenomenal experience. My mentor at the time was this guy, John Katzman, who's built a couple of really big companies. The Princeton Review is the most famous of them. And he was my boss at Noodle, and he kind of inspired me to think about what are the problems that I want to solve in the world, and I'm excited about solving every day. and that's how I got into food. Food's my real, a real lifelong passion for me. And so I ended up leaving Noodle in order to try to figure out what it is that we could do in the agricultural industry to like make it better, kind of more humane in some way.
Yeah.
And got an opportunity to build as CTO of a company called Freight Flow, where we managed and tracked the shipments of produce around the U.S. and Canada. And there, I built a team, was designed the product, ran all the technology, made most of the like large architectural decisions around the technology, and got that from zero to a couple 100,000 in ARR in a couple of years, and then found in Harvie a company that was working. We were kind of making the big guys more efficient, which was great. It was like reducing energy use and making the companies better. But I didn't feel like we were like helping small farms get better. And with Harvie, I got to do that. And so I've been here for I think about 4 years now, working as COO, where I run product, marketing, customer success, HR, and our warehouse and purchasing departments.
Awesome. Well, a few different threads out of that I'd love to kind of dig into. The first one was this kind of translator role you described. This is a role that I have definitely found myself falling into sometimes as well, of translating between technology or engineering and other parts of the business or outside of the business. I'm curious, how do you think about the skills that go into playing that translator role?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, one, a consultant that I read a lot of their work, they're thinking about this. Let me just start over. One way that I think about the kind of translator role is through the lens of conflict. And so what I have found, and I think it is really kind of a fascinating facet of business and just general life problems, is that most conflict, in fact, all conflict, comes from a lack of shared context. It's like one person understands the world works this way, the other person understands the world working a totally different way, right? This a great example is like the parable of like two blind men, one touches an elephant's trunk and the other one touches its its proboscis, and you're like its nose, and you're like, well, these are one's a snake and one's a tree, and it's like no, it's just an elephant. I think the translator role is like, how do you become, is like really thinking about how do you become empathetic to each person in the context that they're bringing to a situation, and then so I think empathy is a real skill there, that improves, that makes it possible to do translation well. And the other, of course, is I think having a really good, at least in the tech world, like having a really good understanding of the kind of fundamentals of technology. Like, what is a database? Why does a database work the way it works? What are the things that move? What are the kind of fundamentals of the web, and how to, understanding like what are the implications of changing URL structure versus changing a button. Kind of once you start understanding those pieces, a lot of conversations become a lot easier. So I think there's like a true technical skill in understanding how the world works, and then the other is having the empathy to explain it in a way that someone who doesn't understand that piece of the world as well as you can explain it to them in their kind of in terms that they'll understand.
That makes sense. Do you have any tactics that you recommend for building that type of empathy?
Yeah. That's we talked about this in the pre-call, but one of the things that comes up for me a lot is trust, right? And like thinking about trust and building a relationship where when you say something, someone believes that they understand the same thing that you're saying, right? And that means like kind of taking time a lot for me to pause and check in. And so saying like, okay, are we on the same page about this topic, whatever it is that we're talking about, and letting them kind of letting the person I'm talking to say it back to me, or be in a place where they're comfortable enough to say, I don't understand what it is that you're talking about. How do we do that? You know, like what you sound crazy right now, and I need you to explain it. And so I think like building the trust that you can be vulnerable and say, I don't know what's going on here with people, I think is really important to that. And also being willing to kind of take the role of the novice or the person who doesn't understand and say, I don't know what, like you're explaining this, this must be my fault. I don't understand what's going on. I think is one, a good way to do that, and also a good way to kind of learn how to make sure that or learn what are the vocabulary, the components of vocabulary that you share with each other.
Yeah. Well, I hear a piece of trust there and also a piece of humility, right? Of being willing to say, like, you know what? I don't get it.
Yeah. I think there's like it's a real it's kind of a power move to be able to, and not in a bad way, but in a like when you're at a place with yourself where you can say like, I don't understand this, and that's okay, and I need you to explain it to me. I think like a lot of people early in their career, certainly I one of them, was afraid to come off as showing like, oh, I don't understand it, you know. And in school, that was like for me really difficult. But as I've gotten more confidence, I've kind of come to understand how much being the person who asks the dumb question is really valuable.
Was there anything in particular that helped you make that shift, or is it just time accumulating?
I had a CEO I worked for at Noodle who was very explicit about it. Who was like, I will always be the dumbest person in the room. He's like, I'm going to ask the dumbest question every time, and he kind of really owned it. And it was it was amazing to see someone who you know didn't not have an ego, right? Like, you know, CEO of a company, used to getting things done the way that they want, but kind of being willing to just put it out there and make it like very explicit that this is everybody needs to understand what's going on in a room for it to be, for us to make forward progress, was really helpful to me, and yeah, something I definitely adopted from them.
That's awesome. Another thing that you mentioned that I thought was interesting and worth kind of digging down is, it sounds like you had a very concrete moment when you said, I decided I wanted to become a manager. I wanted to think about management, which I think is different than a lot of people who kind of get pulled into management. Oh, you'd be a great manager. Come talk. Yeah. You can talk to people and not just machines. You should be a manager.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, one, like what sparked that realization for you? And two, how did you approach kind of learning about what that meant?
Yeah. What sparked it was being a absolutely failed manager, really. So
you got sucked in, somebody pulled you in, and you're like, oh shoot.
Yeah. Well, there were two pieces, right? There was like a part that was my ego saying, I want to, at the time, the way I started thinking about this was I was like, I want to scale my thinking. I want other people to do the things that I think are important to do. And I have so many good ideas and nobody's doing them, blah, 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 right? White guy in his 20s, like I had a great time being very smart, you know, and I was operating and I built a company. I was in meetings with CEOs on a regular basis. I was like somebody who, I was getting reinforcement that my ideas were good. And at the same time, I had hired somebody who I knew somewhat at this design firm to work with me at the design firm, and it was really not going well. Like I was not a very good manager. I was a very bad manager, and I got really frustrated with myself about it. And so that is what inspired me to think about like this is a like problem set that I need to solve. And I also had seen, you know, the first wave of the web go through and had learned one, you know, I'd learned WordPress and then learned Drupal and then learned JavaScript and then learned jQuery and then like seen all of these technologies keep like moving another, you know, forward, and every 2 years having to relearn the whole thing. And I was like, I don't want to keep doing that for the rest of my life. And AI is going to hit this at some point. And amazingly, like we're there now, right? We're seeing it again. I was like, man, this is not a sustainable thing. I need to get into a job where I'm gonna have like a longer term career path, and I can kind of build on the knowledge I'm getting every, you know, I'm working on every year. And that was the other side of like, this is a career path that would be valuable for me. Um, and the and so I think the other side of your question was, what are the things that I started to do to learn to be a good manager?
Yeah.
I really struggled as I was getting started because there's a lot of books about management, but they tend to I think the really great books about management don't give you any tactics. Like they kind of give you like these guiding principles, but when you're a new manager, you're like, I just want to know, how do I approach this specific conversation that I have to have with this person who is not doing the job that I need them to do right now. And like I have not found a lot of good books on that. So where I ended up going from a book learning perspective was actually biographies. I read a lot of biographies, especially like presidents. Presidential biographies are really good. Like the Lincoln Team of Rivals has an incredible set of examples of like dealing with conflict and thinking about it, and how to do that at a high level. And then speaking with, you know, with peers or with friends who are in similar situations and saying like, how do you deal with this? And of course now I think there's a lot of great like blogs and like more temporally like kind of like short time things, or it's like relevant to a specific use case that you can kind of find online. And so I did a lot of that and a lot of stumbling around to kind of build up that library of patterns.
Yeah.
Theories.
I'm curious. So you said part of your inspiration was you realized you were a very bad manager. What, like that's, I think many of us have known a bad manager. I think many fewer of us have recognized that we ourselves are a bad manager.
Yeah.
Like what were the signals that you noticed?
There, like conflict. There's conflict that wasn't productive. There was we weren't moving in sync. Like I wasn't getting projects done that I wanted to get. That, you know, I knew we needed to get done, and I didn't feel good about the way that I was acting in relationship to people who were like, you know, I was friendly with. I was just like, this is like really stressing me out. So I think those are all signals. You know, if you're not executing well, you're not working as a team, and you're frustrated at the end of the day. It's like at some point for me, it was just like, this sucks. I don't want to do this. You know, like I need to fix it. You know, so those are the things for me.
Yeah. And now you said you've gone through that, and now you teach other people how to work with other people and manage. So what is your set of things that you teach new managers?
Yeah, so we have a pretty standard now. I've managed 20 or 30 people directly who have built their own teams, and the way I approach the kind of I've done a lot, especially with with Harvie, where we have a lot of people who are kind of like coming from a warehouse context, or where they're really going from like zero to I have to manage people. We built kind of a pretty solid setup for them, and there's a couple main components. The first one is that I think the foundation of any good manager managee relationship is trust, and that like you basically cannot get anything done until you are starting to build trust with one another. And so that means like same thing we talked about, like having a shared vocabulary, figuring out what that is. I think a really important thing early on is to understand why somebody is working here and where they want to be. So doing that explicitly, just like saying, "Hey, I'm your new manager. I want to understand like what do you like about this job? What do you want to get out of it? And like how can I be helpful to you in your long term career, whether you're here or somewhere else?" And um, write that down somewhere, put a note, put it so that when anytime you're talking to somebody, who you're managing, if you remember this person wants to run their own business someday, or this person really is here because they want clarity of their role and they want to be able to work from 9 to 5 exactly, and they want to do a very good job at that, and that's it. Like whatever it is that motivates them or that gets them up in the morning, you want to like be able to speak to that when you're asking things of them. I think that's really important and really makes life a lot easier, and costs nothing to do. I think 360 feedback, like making sure that you're not waiting 6 months to learn how people are thinking about their job, and also they're not waiting 6 months to learn about how you're thinking about their job, is really important. So everywhere that I've ever done coaching with clients, or where we have in companies that I've run or departments that I've run, we always have a 360 component of a one-on-one. So what am I doing well? What are those? For me now, what I ask is like, what do you like about what I've been doing lately, and what do you wish I was doing differently? And I'll answer that for you, and you answer it for me, and that way you kind of always have that kind of feedback between one another. But if you have those three things, and then you have clear goals and clear areas of responsibility, I think, and clear goals means like you want to achieve X by X date. You want to achieve this. It's measurable, right? Not like you're doing a good job is not a clear goal. Like you have achieved this thing is a clear goal. And once you have a clear goal and the responsibilities, right? Like what are they actually responsible for? What do they not have to be responsible for? I think is really the other kind of key component. But if you have those 5 things, I think you're in really good shape.
Are there any of those in particular that you see new managers struggling with?
So the last two are really hard, right? Like setting clear goals can be really difficult. It's difficult to set a key result at any level of a company, but especially if you haven't had practice with it, I think people really struggle with that. Um, and and so one thing that we've done that helps is kind of set a in onboarding for standardized roles, kind of set a, hey, in your first week you should have achieved X, in your by your third week you should have achieved Y, by your 6th week you should have achieved Z. And if you kind of have those things, that helps a new manager kind of set up, oh right, we can check in on these goals, and while they're doing that they can start figuring out what's the goal they want this person to do as they're coming into the role. that's helpful. Areas of responsibility, I think HR has to really help a new manager on a lot of that stuff, for it to be well done. It's more important for a new manager to be able to explain it well, more than to kind of come up with
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, nice. Anything else about onboarding new managers, or somebody who's new to a managerial role themselves? What they should be thinking about or keeping in mind?
Sure. I think as a new manager, one thing to keep in mind is like your job has completely changed and you're probably going to feel a bit lost, and that's normal. That a lot of people who do a great job as an individual contributor, when they take on a management role, they're like suddenly in a place where they can't do, if they're doing the work, they're failing, right? They need to be handing that work to somebody and then helping them understand it. And that is, I think, deeply uncomfortable, particularly for the kind of type A people who tend to end up being managers. I struggle with that, and like definitely feeling a sense of like being lost or not knowing what it is that the work entails when you don't have a work product at the end of the day, can be hard. And I think one way that we try to help people combat that is, or that tried I've tried to help people combat that, is to say kind of like, what are the three things that you need to do this week that make you a good manager, and like just kind of like, it can't be 100 item list anymore. Like it's got to be two or three things that you're really going to get done. So that's kind of helpful, I think, just kind of in your one-on-one with a new manager setting, or as a new manager prepping for your one-on-one, saying, okay, what's really going to move the needle for me this week? How do I make sure that I'm focused on it?
Yeah. So one thing that's come up a couple of times so far is you've talked about trust and both the sort of problems that a lack of trust can cause, and the fact that trust is a foundation for success as a manager, and a variety of other things. Do you have a way that you think about trust? Any particular techniques you use for building trust? Stuff in that domain?
Yeah, I say this to everyone, and I'm not sure whether it lands well, but one thing I think about a lot is like shared vocabulary, and this may be my kind of like translator theory of management, coming out, but my experience has been that there's probably 20% of the people that I meet where when I speak with them, I feel like everything I said and everything they said came across the transom like fully decoded properly. And about 80% of the people that I talk to, some amount of it is wrong. Like I don't, it's like I don't know whether it's on my end, on their end, whatever, but it's not 100%. Like we're not exactly on the same page. And I think it's been helpful for me to just recognize that, and then to say like, okay, when I'm working with somebody, certainly when I'm hiring, I optimize to find that 20%. Like just we're going to understand each other, But I think as you work together, it's really valuable it's been really valuable to me to build a shared vocabulary around things. So, whatever your shorthand is, one I have with one person I manage right now is like is this a rip the Band-Aid moment? This is a person who's brilliant, has totally great drive and execution, but when there's something that she's somewhat unsure of, right? She's wants to build a whole bunch of build up a database of knowledge about it before she's going to make a decision. So she's hesitant about those decisions. So, and when one day we came up with this, like, hey, like sometimes you just got to rip the Band-Aid, and like this is a moment where you just got to rip the Band-Aid. And it was like, okay, now we have a word that we know when this situation shows up for you, we just say, is this a rip the band-aid moment? If it is, boom, we know what's going to happen. She can go execute on it, and doesn't feel like there's this whole other discussion that has to happen. And I pretty actively seek those out with people, and encourage my staff to do that with their teams as well, because I think that helps you when you have a little bit of a secret language. It puts you on a team together in a fun way, and I think it also and I think that builds trust, and it also clarifies situations and shortens the timeline to discuss situations that maybe come up regularly between you. So that kind of shared vocabulary, I think, is a really good way to build trust. Another one that's really important is acknowledging when you change something, and acknowledging that it's a change from an expectation that you set. So that means you also have to set clear expectations. Say I expect to do this, and or I expect you to do this, or I want you to operate under this assumption. And when that assumption changes, I'm going to acknowledge that the assumption changed. So something that's come up recently for us is our marketing team operated under one key performance metric that was the cost of acquiring a new user. And by those metrics, the team for the last quarter was killing it. But we learned, the quality of those new members had gone down significantly, and that wasn't captured in the marketing team's metrics. It was captured somewhere else. So when we pulled it in and we're like, actually, while you thought you had the best quarter you've ever had, it's been terrible, right? Just going in and saying you're actually screwing up, isn't helpful. It doesn't make the team, it doesn't make the manager feel like they're understood, right. Or it's this doesn't work at all. But if you say, hey, we didn't understand this, we need to change this assumption, your metric is changing, and actually you're in a lot of trouble now, but this isn't your fault. This is we changed the underlying assumption. I think it's a really important way to build to maintain trust with someone when they're working pretty hard to get something done. And that happens, I find that happens a lot more. Those kind of little assumption changes, maybe the big ones like that don't happen that much, but little assumption changes happen a lot. And if you don't acknowledge them, it kind of builds up this, it adds up in this
it feels like gaslighting.
Yeah.
Right? You told me to do this thing, and now you're saying I did poorly, where by the metric they were operating on, they were killing it.
Right, exactly. And even when it's not as clear as that, when it's I told you to do this thing, now I'm telling you to do this other thing, where we just change the priority, right? If you don't acknowledge, hey, I'm changing the priority, and kind of calling that out explicitly, I think there's a feeling that builds up of this person isn't predictable. And I think being predictable, not being predictable in the sense that you always do the same thing every day, but when you do something, you are going to tell people about it in a way that they can understand. I think is really maybe I classify that as trust, but I don't know that necessarily everybody else would.
Yeah. Well, and one thing you did in the marketing example too is you not only shared the change, you shared the why.
Yes.
We have new information.
Yeah.
We need to expand our model in order to get this to work.
Yeah. I mean, certainly presenting changes with context, I think is that's a great point. You don't just say, hey, the KPI is different now, right? That's not a way to build trust. The KPI is different because X is a much more kind of trust building interaction.
Yeah, that makes sense. Anything else that comes to mind?
Around trust building
or situations that cause loss of trust?
Well, I'd be really curious to hear what you think about that. I know you're very thoughtful about it, and it maybe will be interesting to see where your head goes.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think one of the things that is important to me when I've managed folks is making sure that I connect to them both as a manager and as a human being, and being explicit when I'm
Yeah.
doing one or the other. Sometimes being able, having to
Uh-huh.
say, you know what, I've got to put my manager hat on now, and we need to talk about something that's not working very well. And this does not mean that I don't care about you as a human being or whatever, but like, we got to do this.
Uh-huh. That's really interesting. Yeah, I totally agree. I think like looking at the person as a human kind of first, and making sure that you're also presenting yourself as human is really valuable. So
But also acknowledging like our roles make us do things, right? Like we do have a
yes,
managerial relationship in this case, or like if you're the COO, like you have certain things you have to have in your head all the time that
yeah,
are going to influence both the ways that you act, but also the way you're perceived.
yes, yeah, totally. It's so interesting. I have never thought of it as I have to put my manager hat on now. I think of it as I'm taking this hat off so that I can do, like, I'm kind of like job first,
Yeah.
person second in my presentation of myself.
Mm-hmm.
But I that's a really subtle but very meaningful difference, and I like that. It's interesting.
I mean, I think there's pros and cons to each,
Yes.
and I have over time come to an approach that I am always human first,
Yeah.
and then there's the work context.
Yeah.
But and there are times when that can get in the way, right? Like, and you need to be very cognizant of that. So yeah, pros and cons.
I think it's probably recognizes the reality more accurately than the way that I have thought about it, which is I kind of like I do think of like my job as like I am playing a role when I like start the day in the role, I perform the role, and then I am myself afterwards. Um, but it is also it's more likely the case that it's like I'm a human doing stuff, and sometimes I'm putting my hat on. I like that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I think it plays into trust a lot.
Yes.
I was just talking with someone who has realized they don't want to work with large corporations. They want to work with small ones because in the large corporations, they always felt like a cog dealing with bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
And bureaucracy does not lead to trust. Feeling like you're dealing with a process or a machine does not lead to trust.
Yeah.
Feeling like you're connecting with a human being who sees you for who you are is where I think trust starts to come from.
Yeah. Ironically, because a lot of bureaucracy seems to be built on the fact that there is no trust. Like it's designed for a lack of trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So another theme that has come up in our conversation is this idea of shared context. And I love the vocabulary as a shortcut to that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because like in your example, you had a lot of context building up to that first time where you talked about, oh my gosh, we've got to rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
And now you can recall that entire context with that simple phrase,
Yeah.
which is great. Do you have other tactics you use or recommend for building shared context?
Yeah. I mean, so sort of obvious ones are like actually metrics, right? And making sure that the metric definitions are shared and that you're kind of talking about them at the same time. So when you can do that, and you can say, oh, this is the number that moved, this is the other number that moved, that we understand those the same way. We have a theory about that jives with one another. I think that really helps a lot. Like when people don't have to look to you to measure themselves, but they can look to some third party or something that they can feel like they have control over. I think that is a really good way to set their own context, and it also it's a context that's kind of incontrovertible in some ways, right? Like everybody says, okay, this is the way we're looking at it. Boom, done. Does that? Sorry, I see you.
No, well, I kind of want to dig in there because that's an area that I've had some talks with people about how challenging that is to set for like engineering performance or something like that,
Yeah.
right? Like there, I don't remember whose law it is, but there's some law that any metric that can be gained, that you
All metrics
starts
will
to
be
become a
gamed.
goal.
Yes.
All metrics will be gamed.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And particularly, I think there's a set of people often in technical departments who are really good at games.
Yeah. Love them.
And you
Yeah.
love games.
Yeah.
You give me a metric, I'm going to game it.
We will find
And
the most fun way to make this metric not relevant to the business.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and like that can be okay,
Mhm.
right? If you talk about it. And there are times when even like the knowing that it will be gamed, the metric is still useful, and it may even still nudge people in the right direction as they think about gaming.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, how do you think about that with this concept of being able to measure yourself without having to go to an individual's opinion, having this shared context and reality without resulting in or limiting the resulting amount of gaming of those metrics?
I'm sure you've run into this, but one kind of like first thing that we always do is you never give one metric. There's always two.
Yes.
So it's always like, here's the goal metric and here's the backstop metric that we think a bad actor, like any of us who wanted to game the system, would use in order to make the metric look good, even though it wouldn't actually be positive. So trying to tie it back to a couple of other things that, there is the like, good, fast, and cheap. And like, if we're saying optimize for good, we also still need to measure fast and cheap to make sure those don't get wildly out of control. And so like kind of I think designing metrics around not one but a series of metrics that kind of reflect the whole of the or more reflective of the whole is valuable. I also think a lot of people make the mistake of incentivizing on the metric where it becomes the metrics that should drive your incentives have to be so hard that they can't be gamed, or that gaming them is a win, right? Profit is a great metric for like, here's the one that we're going to incentivize. You increase the profit. I don't care what game you're playing. That's great. Like Yahtzee, right?
Up to some level of accounting fraud.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Up to
there's your backstop metric.
Somewhere below Enron, right? And then and then like there's like kind of doing a handful of metrics as a group and not incentivize, not kind of measuring the person on the metrics, but kind of setting the process and your ability to manage the process being reflected by that metric. I think is really valuable. I think it's really, really tempting to overemphasize the value of the metric, but my experience has been they're so powerful on their own that if you just present, hey, this is the one that's important to you, like almost anything you do past that is pushing them towards gaming. If you just say this is important, like if you've hired well, like they'll figure it out and it'll be great. And that's all you really need to do around
that, I think. Nice. I like that. Okay. Now let's come back to shared context.
Yeah,
I just wanted to diverge there because it's a challenging topic, right? I was just talking with someone about how do we think about goals for junior engineers? Like, well, some of it is, what's your point? Are you trying to encourage growth? Are you trying to encourage productivity? What are you trying to encourage? But also this gameability factor is huge.
I found like not to take this down the wrong path, but I have gotten a lot of value out of looking at engineering ladders, like the ladders that I've seen come up. They kind of have I think they play into the like geeky side of all of us, in that they're kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons style, like you get points.
Some will even put it, they're like, this is strength, this is dexterity.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And like and I think like kind of putting those all out there and then being able to say like, where do you want to be? Like, are you a mage or are you like how do we kind of like emphasize these in the right way for you as a person? I think is really a really valuable way to kind of do that. that measuring of
Totally. And to your point, it's a group of metrics, not
yes,
any one single.
right, yeah, you can't and it's never lines of code, right? Like there are
Right.
just terrible metrics out
Okay. Cool. So coming back to shared context,
there.
other things that you found useful for setting that type of shared context, whether it's between two individuals or at a team level or organization wide.
Yeah. Um, there are a couple processes that we do in I do both at our leadership level, at the department level, and at one-on-one level that are very explicitly calling out your personal context. So what we do something wins and we call wins and ahas, things that have gone well and things that you've learned in the last week or the last whatever month, whatever period it is. But doing that, we call them out at the personal and the professional level every time. So you're saying like, here's something I did that, like for me, it was like I just climbed a V5 bouldering for the first time like 2 weeks ago. So that was my win. And then my aha was I was trying to sell um, my farm and like thought I had a deal and it was totally screwed up and so like it went off and what I learned is like well there's a reason you work with real estate brokers on these types of things as opposed to doing it with your friends and like kind of like having that context with people I think on the personal level then coming in and saying here's what's going on with the company as I see it, what I think went well. Here's where I'm frustrated, or where I think we need to change in some way. Most of the time, it's just like exchanging a little, like a short. Oh, that's something interesting about who that person is and why they might use a bouldering metaphor, or like say that their back hurts or whatever. But I think that's a really great way of kind of like just building that context over time. And doing that both as a human, as we've said, and also like when you're talking about anything else in the course of the week, if you know what their professional context is, here's the thing I'm worried about the most, or here's the thing that I just learned about, like, well, that's why they're obsessed with talking about that this week versus like I have no idea why the only thing I've heard from Kyle this week is the Stripe payments thing, right? It's like what? So I think that's a really helpful tool.
Well, it might be a signal towards some possible shared vocabulary too, right? Like you might be receptive to metaphors about bouldering versus,
right,
using gear and going up higher or whatever. Like I'm not a deep climber, but
right.
I know like there's a few things there that maybe I could pull on when we're talking about something.
I've had I've had a coaching client who even explicitly called it out. He was like, if we both played soccer, if you can use soccer metaphors for me, it will make my life easier. So like now it's kind of a game for me whenever we're talking about something like, what is the soccer version of the metaphor for this? Because now we can, it's a whole, it's a whole thing. So I think that's a great, I like that.
We've talked about a bunch of different things and we're getting close to the end of our time. Are there any things we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we cover?
There's an emotional experience that I've seen. I saw in myself, I've seen in myself, and I've seen in a lot of people, and I especially see it in new managers. And I'll describe what happened to me and what made me have this realization. I'll describe the realization. When I was working at Noodle, I was having these massive mood swings in the course of a day. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got everything figured out. I'm the best. And then I was like, I know nothing and I'm useless and I suck. And it was like, there was a period where it was like happening in the 1 week. And then it just got to the point, and you see it, where it's like every day, every hour, I don't know what the hell is going on. And I was thinking about this a lot. Like it was like really bugging me. And I was thinking about my life on the x-axis and how my emotional experience was like shooting up and then dropping down and shooting up and dropping down, shooting up and dropping down. It's like this crazy sine wave. And at some point I was like thinking about it, and I realized that the problem was the way I was looking at this was not, I was looking at it from outside of it, outside of the experience, and saying just measuring the emotional experience and not what I was looking at that gave me the emotional experience. And so suddenly I realized that actually what was happening was I'm climbing a mountain of knowledge. Like I'm learning all of these things. And when I feel like I'm at the bottom of something, it's because I'm looking up at the mountain of knowledge I have to climb to get to the next thing I want to get to. And when I feel awesome, it's because I'm looking down at the mountain of knowledge I've just acquired to get to somewhere. And so the thing that I talk about with a lot of people on my team is like, when you're having that emotional change, it's like, are we looking up the mountain or are we looking down the mountain right now? Right? Because it's like nothing has changed within the day that should make you either amazing or terrible. It's just which direction are you looking? And then for me, it helped me become like, oh, when I feel bad, it's because I actually just learned what I need to do next. Right. And that's like the next piece that I need to climb. And so that became very motivating for me. Whereas before I was just feeling like really kind of lost at sea.
That is incredible. I just got so much value out of you saying that, because this is an experience I have felt multiple times. And I was thinking as you were describing it, I was like, I no longer have that experience as a manager, but every time I go and start a new business, I'm in that roller coaster.
Yes.
And your description and your metaphor is incredibly helpful there.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah. I like it. It really changed my life to be like, oh, this is what I'm just climbing a mountain and it's where I'm looking, and like nothing has actually changed. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Cool. Awesome. Anything else on your mind that you want to share or talk about?
I'm curious since we have a couple minutes, I would love, what do I get to learn from you? What are you learning that I should learn?
Goodness. So I think some of the things that I'm thinking about, or that so I'm noticing patterns right now. I'm very much in a pattern collection mode. For a number of ways. I'm doing a lot of coaching and trying to observe patterns in the people that I'm coaching and the challenges they're facing. I'm doing a lot of these interviews and looking for patterns. One pattern that is coming up over and over again in the interviews is this question of empathy and how important it is to people in management roles, but also to people in engineering roles, to people all over. And so I'm now, it's not so much a lesson that I've learned yet, but I'm now looking for, like, how do I help people both develop the desire to develop more empathy and develop or share tactics and practices that will really help do that? Because it is, if I were to look at themes, there's a couple of themes that have come up. I think another one is around this sort of just being clear and open about what you are trying to do, and like humble and willing to say when you don't get something, and like all of those things. Like that's another recurring pattern. But yeah, the empathy one, I feel like, is one where it's one where I think it's harder for people who are struggling with it to understand, if that makes sense. And so I'm trying to figure out kind of the shape of that problem.
A thought I had as you were talking is that I think the path towards empathy is vulnerability. And we hadn't talked about this, but that does come up a lot with new managers, is like, how do you become vulnerable? And how do you have the strength to be vulnerable first in a relationship with people? Because that does, I don't think you can get to empathy without vulnerability. And I think a lot of people are stopped up there,
Yeah. So you almost need to step back once before and say, like, how do you build the strength to be, I mean, to be human, to be vulnerable,
Yeah,
to be like there connecting raw one to one?
yeah, yeah. And like, what's it? Where there's some amount of to me, I think a lot of it is like actually confidence in yourself, right? Is like feeling secure or feeling safe in the work that you're doing. And I've been in work environments where I didn't feel like the manager had my back, or I didn't have the trust of the manager, or they didn't have I couldn't trust them, whatever it is. And so like I didn't feel like I could say something to a direct report that would be vulnerable because it would go and maybe they'll use it to make me look bad somewhere else, right? So I think a really important thing for executives is to create an environment where not knowing or where screwing up is accessible and so, it's like you find the balance of like, is it celebrated? Like, no, but is it okay? Like, definitely, like you kind of, I think
Yeah.
there's, and different companies, I think, find different versions of that, but you really want, one thing that John, the founder of the Princeton Review, and I kind of came to was like, look, I want you to hear, I'm going to tell you the worst news I have as soon as I possibly have. And like, that's our agreement, is like, whatever I know, if it's bad, you're going to hear about it from me as soon as I can hear about it, or as soon as I learn about it. And I now do that with all of my direct reports, where I'm like, this is our agreement. You are never in trouble with me if you tell me about the problem first. If I find
Yeah.
out about the problem from somebody else, and especially if I find out about that problem from somebody who I report to, we are going to have a major issue, and and when we start out that way, and I tell them to start that way out with their team, it's like, okay, they're going to test it in the first month because something's going to go wrong, right? and
Yeah.
and so then if I can get them to tell me the thing that's really fucked up, that happened, then I know we're like in pretty good shape, because then I can be like, great, let's work on it together, and then that's like a huge trust builder, and also I think helps build the kind of vulnerability side very quickly.
All right, that's it for this Human Skills interview. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. You can also subscribe to the Human Skills newsletter, which there's a link to right down below, to get notified of interviews like this as they come out. Take care, y'all. This is K-Ball signing out.